Leadership to Wealth. In today's show, I know every time we're always talking about being a leader and learning from leaders. And well, today's show, we've got a man who was originally trained in the military. He was in the U.S. Army and a captain. And he moved on to working with many organizations, talking about leadership and what it means to be a leader, what it means to be an executive, and how to really improve your connection with your team. His name is Doug Thorpe, and I really want to encourage you to listen up to his interview today because he has taken on a challenge to help 10,000 managers, leaders improve their leadership style, and I really want to be a part of that. And so I hope you guys listen up. If you can see yourself there, if you want to be a leader, if you want to grow in your current leadership, today's show, Doug Thorpe. Doug, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. So glad to have you with us.
Oh, you bet, Neil. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Doug, you've done a lot of stuff in your life. But before we get into a lot of that stuff, obviously your background really started in the military
Right.
as an army, and you retired as an army captain. But just give us like a quick blitz of where you're from, and then what led you into the army, and then man, you like I said, you've been into so many different spaces. We got to jump into all of that.
I
But
just can't keep a job. There you go.
yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, Neil. Thank you. Yeah, yes, I was in the military out of college, but I grew up in San Antonio. I'm native Texan. Being in San Antonio as a young man, I there were 5 military bases there at the time. You kind of couldn't throw a rock without hitting a service member, so it was sort of a natural. I got motivated and excited about doing it. Got commissioned in college and went into service, and then. Out of service, I had the good fortune of being hired by what at the time was called Texas Commerce Bank. It's a bit of a legendary banking story in the state of Texas. It was at the time chaired by a guy named Ben Love, and he too is a business legend. He's now deceased, but I didn't know at the time. I was a little bit young and stupid and didn't have any idea what I was being exposed to in terms of leadership development and executive management practice that was rock solid.
Mm.
And being able to learn in that laboratory, I really it catapulted the fundamental understanding of leadership concepts that I'd gotten out of all my military training, and really turned it into a focus on business. And
Mm.
spent 20 years with the bank before launching out on my own with my own entrepreneurial ideas.
Yeah. And any just out of curiosity, any brothers and sisters?
Nope. Part of my story is I'm an only child, the product of a hardworking single mom. She was the first entrepreneur I ever know or ever met. I got to know, and I watched her and her struggles and success as an entrepreneur, and that kind of lit the fire in me. That is what kind of finally came to the front after the army and the bank career.
Wow. Okay, so I have to let out a little secret here. I share with people that I used to work for the federal government here in Canada, and I worked with the tax service, and I've worked with corrections as well. But a good chunk of my time was I actually worked with the military as a civilian. And what was interesting is that I actually can see now, because I ended up moving into a formation that I was actually with the military, and my boss was an ex-military chief and chief petty officer, first class, Dave Crocker. Thank you. And I'm going to share that a lot of my lessons, a lot of my habits that I have in business, I developed from that one man and what he taught me. And it just the ability to not worry about tomorrow, move the yardstick today.
Right.
You're moving the yardstick, and that's made all the difference. And even this podcast, I should really give a shout out to him, because you don't have to be perfect. You just got to move the yardstick every day. And so I'm really looking forward to what you share with us about your time in the military. And, definitely thank you for, even though I'm in Canada, thank you for your service because,
Sure. No,
you know,
appreciate that. Happy
it
to have
takes
done it.
someone to be willing to stand up for others. So I really do appreciate that. Thank you. Let
Yeah.
me ask you this. So now you took that and you came out and you got into business. And now I really want to hear about that journey. But just before we came on air, you just dropped a bomb on me that you have a challenge for 2022. So, guys, listeners, we got to hear this challenge. I'm sure you're like, okay, we don't even know much about Doug yet, but you got to hear this challenge that he is taking on. And this is definitely a military mindset. Doug, what is this challenge that you've got for 2022?
Challenge that's come together is I've challenged my firm and my network here locally to help me influence 10,000 people who are either company owners or managers to become a better boss in 2022.
Wow.
It's all based on the statement, and HR people know this by heart. The quote is, "People join companies, but they quit bosses." And there are a lot of factors that led me to this decision, but I think it's time we hit it head on. People are tired of being abused in toxic cultures that bad bosses create. And the pandemic has shown us that people are just fed up with it and they're quitting by the thousands. They're
Yeah.
quitting those toxic cultures and those bad bosses. And if you've got that responsibility right now, you can do something different.
Wow. Okay. 10,000 is a significant number to be able to break it. You've only got 12 months in a year. So to reach 10,000 bosses, you've really got to be able to impact a lot of people on an ongoing basis. Obviously doubling, tripling, quadrupling up the number of people that you're helping and teaching. But the
Right.
question I want to ask is, how do you get to that in terms of, is this something that has just historically gone under the radar? Nobody's ever called out bosses, or are we saying that there has been some sort of shift that we're identifying now bosses that are, managers that people don't want to work with? What's really happening there?
Well, I think the reality is it's been around for a long time. I write and I talk about this a lot. If you think about it, at least in terms of the Western business world as I know it, when you think on a global scale, we have a weird tradition of looking at our company, and if we have a team lead position or a supervisor job come open, what do? We hire the best producer. We hire the person that's doing the most already at work, maybe the best salesman, the best producer, the best administrator, the best technician, the best technologist, whatever. We make them the team lead. And the
That's
first
right.
thing we do is we screw up our best producer.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
And yet that person takes on that mantle, and they by trial and error they figure out how to become a manager. And seldom, it's the rare organization that immediately starts talking about leadership, but they are talking about management. They're talking about process and budgets, and they're pounding on this person to produce. Well, that starts a very bad transition of only worrying about how to crack the whip and get the numbers out. And it's only of the very enlightened person that says there's more to this. If I can influence my people in a better way, I'm going to get more production.
Yeah.
And that's the person that can possibly turn their attention to be how to become a better leader. And when I talk to most of my one-on-one clients, I immediately ask the question, do you think there's a difference between management and leadership? Most everybody in the modern era says yes, of course. And then we start a dialogue about, well, what is it? All the answers I get are somewhat all over the board, but it generally boils down to a simple phrase: management is about process and leadership is about people. Real simple.
Right.
And people have made careers out of managing a process, turning
Yeah.
the numbers, hitting budget, producing volume. And there's not anything necessarily wrong with that. But oftentimes, when you focus on those people and their track record, there's a lot of collateral damage. There's a lot of broken lives in their wake. People that left very frustrated, very burned out, very disenchanted by the company because they had the experience with that one bad manager.
Right. So interestingly, because I worked for the federal government and I started with human resources, working for tax here in Canada, and one of the things that we recognized was that we were always hiring the best auditor to then be the manager, and we would have nothing but problems because that best auditor clearly was not the best at dealing with the individuals. He was great with numbers, and we would run into that over and over again.
Yep.
And then they started to transition that, and they started realizing, hey, we need people with better skills to be people skills to be able
People
to
skills.
handle
Yep.
the other.
Right.
uh and
That's it.
it was back to what you're sharing here, going when I got into with the military, and this chief petty officer who really showed me this drastic difference of looking for the person and looking at their skills, and because he had spent a 30-year career of being with the men and going, who are these men, and who what can they do, and who should move up and who's happy where they are. And so what you're saying is resonating with me completely, and I'm sure there's somebody right now who's going, yes, please talk to my boss. So okay, so what does this toxicity, this manager who probably doesn't even know he's a manager, probably thinks he's a leader, or she, they just think, hey, this is my job. What's the impact of that on the employees below them?
Well, there's so many different dimensions to this, and a lot there are many things that kind of appear as symptoms of
Yeah.
being a bad manager. There are issues with trust. Trust happens to be a very favorite topic of mine. I with a colleague last year, he and I together co-authored a book about building trust at work, and trust is a big issue. And
Mm,
the bad manager has a way of totally eroding trust. They pit people against each other. They share secrets that they shouldn't be sharing. And if I'm an employee and I walk into my boss's office and he starts talking about Sally, one of my peers, and I have to question, well, my gosh, what are you saying about me behind my back?
yeah.
And so the trust just totally gets destroyed, and without trust, people hold back. They're going to show up to work and only agree to do the bare minimum to keep their paycheck coming. They're
Mhm.
not gonna really volunteer to go the extra mile, and, that's really the fundamental premise of our book that we released last year, Trust at Work, is that as a leader, you can do more and be very intentional about building trust in the workplace. When
Mhm.
you build trust, people are willing to invest their discretionary effort to go that extra mile, and that's one big dimension of it. There are other things that I've seen over the years. I once worked for a guy that was my all-time worst boss, and he was a department head, and there were 3 of us that were unit heads reporting to him. The
Yeah.
3 of us at the peer level, we realized that we were never gonna get our annual review to score any higher than he had been scored, and,
Yeah.
that put us in a real prohibitive position for a couple of years that we had to report to him until the company finally saw fit to move him out position he was in. But one could argue the 3 of us, we never really recovered from that haircut we took on our rating because ratings meant money, and it meant
Yeah.
level of bonus, and it meant all those things. And to put it in common terms, if he was only getting graded a C by his bosses, that's what we got graded.
Right.
And it didn't matter what
Wow.
we did. We could have conquered the world, and we were not gonna get anything better than a C.
Right. Right. Oh my goodness. It's interesting. I remember having a boss that the only thing they had in their toolbox, I'm going to call, was a hammer. And every problem, and I was their problem. So every time it was a hammer to the head. And I remember I was only in that position for a week, and at the end of the week, was like, I'm done. I'm going back. I'm going back. This is not the job for me. And
Well,
they
there,
actually switched everything around. I got
yeah.
it. I reported to someone else, and I ended up doing 9 years. I worked 9 years there after that. But you're still resonating with everything you're saying, and I think people can either see themselves in one space or the other. Is what you're creating for us is, hey, yeah, I've got a boss like that, or I'm hoping that some bosses out there, some managers are out there, are starting to hear what you're talking about and maybe seeing themselves. um, but that's got to be a little, because you want to make a difference with the managers. How do you help them to even see that this is, to look in the mirror and see, oh, this is me that he's talking about?
Well, a great question, and the whole issue is this, and at least is the way I look at it. Leadership is a very
Because
broad
you have to find
topic.
10,000 of them.
Well, and let's just boil it down to one guy. If I'm
Okay.
coaching you about your leadership, so
Yeah.
here's the challenge. You can go to Google, and there's something like 60,000 books about leadership that have been
Yeah.
published.
Yeah.
So, who do you talk to, and what framework do you adopt? My argument is, in some respects, it doesn't matter which one you pick, just pick one. Create for yourself a framework of leadership principles that you want to live by.
Mm.
And when I ask people to start the process of sort of envisioning, painting a picture of the leader they want to be, we talk about attributes like trust, integrity, reliability, motivation, communication, relationship, and you go to those 60,000 books on leadership, and you're going to find checklists of here's all the attributes that make a good leader. Well, a lot of them obviously overlap, and you can pick your own list of attributes that you value. And one of the, I guess I'd call it a secret, but inevitably, if I ask somebody, name me 5 people that you know about, either in history or current or sports or politics or whatever, people you admire for some attribute of leadership. Who are they, and what is the attribute? And I'll get names like Abraham Lincoln or Winston Churchill, or down here in the States, Nick Saban, the football coach. I'll get those kind of answers. And you start asking, okay, so what attribute? What is it about them? And we'll talk about those attributes. And you know what's amazing? In a scientific study that I just made up, there the attribute you pick will align with how you're sort of naturally wired. You resonate with the thing that is already wired into you, is kind of a natural attribute. So the fact that you're recognizing that in somebody else may be the exact place you need to start developing your own leadership framework.
Wow, you just dropped a bomb right there. So I would, as you asked the question, I just started thinking. Well, you mentioned Nick Saban. I loved Marvin Lewis, who coached the Cincinnati Bengals for 16
Right.
years. And one of the things that I loved about him, even when he was with the Baltimore Ravens and they won all the Super Bowls, and is that he was mostly even keel. He was organized. He kept things in bite-sized pieces for his people. He was like, look, this is your job. This is what I want you to do. And I want you to do that job the best you can do it. And if everybody does their job, and I was like, man, that's so simple and
Right.
it's so doable. Right. So that's why I really like that guy. And I used to love listening to his press conferences. And so it's interesting. So now I'm thinking, oh my goodness, that what resonates with that for me. Obviously, it's important to me about being organized, keeping things simple, and not trying to do everybody else's job. I literally teach people about building a team, so so you guys can all work together. So wow, that's really interesting. So people can literally look around at who they see as leaders and be able to start identifying these traits that they recognize and value.
Yeah, they can begin the work of creating that leadership framework or that vision of the
Yeah.
leader they really want to be if they're
Yeah.
going to commit to starting the journey on how to become a better leader. This whole leadership thing, if you've never done it before, is a little bit like the 12-step program. You have for step 1 is admit you got a problem, right? And
Right.
same thing is true of leadership. If you say, I don't think my team is operating as well as I'd like it to, their turnover is high, team performance is low, product quality is bad, all those things that are indicators of a problem. Well, I'm going to go so far as to say a lot of times that starts with the guy at the top, those
Yeah.
things, the buck stops there,
A-
right? So
Absolutely. Sorry, go ahead.
introspection and
Yeah.
say, "All right, how can I make a difference? How can I change this?"
Yeah, absolutely. So you just really hit me there because we're all listening. When we think of the difference between a manager and a leader, when we think of a leader, there's someone who's willing to, if whatever the problem is, whatever the issue, the challenge, they're going to look at themselves first. And that really differentiates a leader. They're going to look at themselves and go, what is my part to play in this? And then start looking out from there, and then be able to go to evaluate of each of the pieces. And I heard, oh, I can't remember who said this. They talked about, if you could imagine an athlete trying to, when they're trying to prepare for the next race, the next Olympics, they have to go through and evaluate their performance without judging character throughout that whole process. Just
Right,
performance, performance, performance,
right.
and because they can improve on those things and realize that the character is a different part of it. Whereas I think sometimes if I look at managers that I've had rather than leaders, they're immediately judging your character rather than, how can we improve the performance? And they're always going to look at you rather than what their part to play is
Yeah,
in that.
they're gonna
Yeah.
wanna assign blame for the poor performance.
Yeah.
They're gonna look at the roster and say, "Well, to you stay with the sports analogy, well, you dropped
Yeah.
that ball in the 5th inning, and that's why we lost, shame on
Right.
you."
Right.
Well, no.
So one of the things I think is important that you're identifying here is, if for us as listeners, we need to be able to ask ourselves the question, do I look at myself first, or do I immediately start looking at everybody else? And if you're a person, if you got you guys, if you're listening right now, I think it's important for us to be able to realize one of the keys to being a leader is just being able to look at yourself. And as we continue to go through here with Doug, I want to encourage you guys to ask yourself some of these questions first, and then be able to look at the processes and the things that Doug's going to reveal to us here. So Doug, help us a little bit more in terms of how to recognize, that we need help first, that we need to be looking in the mirror.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so really, step 1 in the process is look in the mirror and admit to yourself there is an opportunity. I don't wanna say it's a weakness or a failure, but let's say there is an opportunity to do more
Yeah.
and be more. So and that's true whether you're in a business or a family or a community where there's some expectations of you having some, leadership responsibilities. You've gotta look at what the substance of that can be and what's your opportunity to make that better. And then the next step has to do with trying to do an honest evaluation of exactly where you are.
Right.
And you can start with it, asking yourself, is there anything I do right? And count those as strengths and say, okay, I got that. Maybe it might be I'm a reasonable communicator. People seem to understand when I talk to them. So okay, well that's in the checkbox, plus column. Or I'm good with analytics, or I'm good with whatever. You can build a list of strengths, but then you got to start looking at, okay, where are my gaps? Where are my
Mm.
weaknesses? Where are my opportunities to grow? Somewhere. And at that point, you might need to get some outside input. You might need to ask for some 360 feedback from the people that know you best
Yeah.
and try to convince them you want some honest feedback because you're trying to take that next step up. And so you need that constructive. And there's obviously tools out there you can subscribe
Yeah.
to more formally gather that feedback.
Right.
But you can do it very informally as well. And by the way, don't use your golf buddies or your drinking buddies to give you that feedback unless they're very you've been blessed with a very unique opportunity. Those guys
Mm,
are very real in what they talk to you about.
right.
If they are
So,
real, yes, you can ask them that question. What am I really doing wrong? What do I really need help with?
yeah. Well, let me. I'm curious now. You've learned these lessons. Is that as a result of noticing these in yourself? Like, have you run into these problems,
Oh
or
yeah.
did you just
Oh yeah.
naturally learn these things through your time in the military and
No,
just
no, it definitely was my own growth trajectory. There are very significant milestones that I can point to in my life
yeah,
where I had some, major learning to do. And what I'll say, just in context for the whole thing, I mentioned at the top that I'm a only child of a single mom. Well,
yeah.
one huge blessing my mother bestowed on me was the wisdom to surround me with mentors as a young man. I had about
Wow.
5 different guys in our community that came alongside and mentored me as a young man. So they helped me shape, what I needed to know about growing up as a young man. And but it also ingrained in me the value and willingness to look for mentors. And to this day, I mean, I'm actually going to be 69 in about 10 days, and I still have
Happy
mentors.
birthday.
I Thank you. I still have mentors. I've
Yeah.
got a group of guys I meet with on a regular basis. A couple of them are in their 90s, but they're still mentoring, they're still giving, and I still count that as part of my ongoing learning.
Okay, here's the question, because I know that there are people who will look and they'll look at themselves and they'll think, I'm not really a leader. Is it possible for someone to learn, grow into being a leader? Like, I want to be a leader, but I don't think I have what it takes to do that. Is that something that someone who's maybe not in a management position right now, they're not in a leadership position, but they're trying to look down the road, is this something that I can do and be?
That's a real interesting question, and I've dealt with a lot in my life. And to be honest, I've vacillated with my answer and opinion of that. But I'll tell you where my current is, and I've been in this position now for a long time in this thinking. The basic answer to your question is yes. I think you can learn to be a better leader. In a lot of great business schools that I'm aware of, they for decades have had raging debates about whether leaders are born or made, nature versus nurture. And I have watched people go to the mat arguing that you can't teach leaders.
Yeah.
You have to be born with it. My real world experience tells me that there is no doubt there are some people that are natural born leaders. And when I usually start coaching one of those guys, the immediate tip off for me is that person usually inevitably, when they first start talking about leadership, they say, "That's not me." They'll say, "Nope, not that's not who I am." But as we talk more and more about it, the reason they're saying, "No, it's not them," is because it's such second nature. It's almost like breathing. They are just leading, and they don't think about it.
Hmm.
They don't ever have to call it out, focus on it. They're just doing it.
Hmm.
Now, for those that don't have that ability, and that would be the equivalent of me trying to shoot a 3-pointer, I do not have the gift to shoot 3-point shots. And there's probably no amount of coaching that's going to help me do that any
So you're a little bit more of a Shaquille O'Neal than a Kobe Bryant.
I'm probably more the water boy when it comes to basketball, but you can be taught some of those skills. You can
Mhm.
refine things. I mean, I over the years I was able to shave strokes off my golf game by getting some coaching. I wasn't a natural at it by any means, but with some coaching, I did make improvements. And I got
Mm.
to where I liked my golf game. Wasn't going to win a tournament, but I liked being able to do it the way I was doing it. Same thing can be true with the leadership, with coaching and training and some learning. You can be a better leader, plain and
Right.
simple.
Yeah. Part of the reason that I have this podcast, Leadership to Wealth, is one of the things I recognized was when I got called out many years ago by, actually it was my pastor at the time, and he said, I want you to think about sort of leading this group at church. And I thought, why do you want me to do that? He's like, because you're a natural leader. And I thought, I have no idea what you're talking about. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Mhm.
And then he started sharing these different, he's like, you do this, you do that. Nobody asked you to do that. You automatically jumped in on these things. And I was like, oh, really? And it actually took time for me. And, if you guys are listening, I hope you can maybe look and see yourself. It took time for me to accept that title. I never. Oh, wait, that was a piece of leadership that um, some people call it servant leadership or something like that, where okay, great, I can do that, but I don't need to. Don't put me up front. And then learning a different type of leadership where somebody needs to stand up in front of everybody and yeah, okay, I'm the one at fault, call me the one at fault or whatever, and let's move this forward.
Yep.
And so I think you're even relaying some of my life to me in this, and I believe wholeheartedly what you're talking about, in you can learn and grow as a person if that's really something that you want.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, I wouldn't have a business doing what I do if it wasn't true. I
Yeah.
definitely have been able to help people find that change in their effectiveness and their level of impact as a leader, whether it's in a business, a nonprofit, or community effort. It can be done.
Yeah. So now you've worked with a lot of really big companies and taught companies like ExxonMobil, where people can't even imagine a leadership structure in some of these businesses because they're so large. What are some of the things that when you go in and you look around, you like go, oh, absolutely, I can help improve this culture. I can help these managers. What are some of the things that right off to you jump out and you're like, oh, yes, we can make change here. Let's go.
Yeah. Well, it all starts with the fundamental thing. Just because they work for a global brand or they're part of a leadership team inside a global brand, and you mentioned Exxon, and I've worked with Coca-Cola and UPS and some of those other big brands. The truth of the reality is we're still down to one-on-one people relationships.
Yes.
The people that have worked their way up to be in the chain of command at those organizations are no different than you and I sitting right here, right now. We breathe the air around us. We eat the food around us. We put on our clothes basically the same way. Nothing much else is different. And so when you peel away the aura of the brand, they are still dealing with the basic issues. I've got a team of people. I need to try to move this business from point A to point B. And you can complicate it with all of the technology and all of the jargon and all of the vernacular that they might use. But when it all comes down to it, you've got finite resources represented by the team that's sitting around your table. And what are you as a leader going to do with that team?
So now, okay, with years and years of, first of all, leadership training and then teaching leadership, what would you say is your biggest failing as a leader right now that you're working on?
Oh, let's see, that's a great question. I would tell you one of the biggest challenges I face, and I just took on the responsibility. I'm the sitting chairman of an organization in the greater Houston area that is an association of business advisors. It's essentially a volunteer organization, although by legal standing, we are a for-profit enterprise.
Yeah.
But it operates like a nonprofit. And running a nonprofit is one of the hardest challenges I've ever experienced anywhere.
Yeah.
because your people are not getting paid, you have no leverage
Yeah.
on their role, and you have to really tap into well, I love the phrase, "Harness the power of your mind's attention and your heart's affection." If your mind's
Yeah.
attention and heart's
Yeah.
affection.
Yeah.
So, if in one of these quasi nonprofit or full-blown nonprofit environments, that's all you got to work with, is convincing people to use their intellect for the greater good of the organization, and couple that with trying to get motivation from whatever their passions are, or whatever their heart's desire is to be there in the first place. You
Mm.
gotta work hard to connect those 2 together, because you cannot just rely on one without the other. And as a leader, I'll confess it's easy to lose sight of that. You kinda start going
Mhm.
down the path of, uh, maybe the intellectual side of it. "Okay, guys, you've got all this experience. Let's get it on the table. Let's put a training course together. Let's put a package together. Let's
Yeah.
get a market offering together." You start getting this pushback, and you have no real leverage other than at that point to come back and say, "Well, does this not line up with your passion? And no, why did you join this organization in the first place? Didn't you say that's what you wanted to do?"
Right.
And you kind of get into those sort of loops. So it's a big challenge.
Yeah. I've had the privilege and the pain of sitting on nonprofits and not for profits. So I understand what you're saying in terms of the difficulty there sometimes. So let me ask, as you see this, what is it for you that you're like, okay, this is something I have to be present to or pay attention to be able to perform for and be the leader for these people.
Well, yeah, being there in a likewise mode. I mean, I don't get paid a dime to be the president of this outfit.
Yeah.
It's real easy to walk away from what might be a frustrating conversation and say, "Why am I doing this?" So, I don't need this. I don't need this hassle. I don't need
Yeah.
this frustration. I could spend this 2 hours doing something with, revenue producing activities. Why don't
Yeah.
I go do that?
Yeah.
So I too have to kinda reengage and challenge myself to my own level of mind's attention and heart's affection.
Yes.
What am I really trying to accomplish here, and kinda renew that vision. And that leads me to a real quick point I'll try to slip in here real fast. And this what I'm getting ready to say covers everything we're talking about here. It's vitally important for an individual who wants to be a leader to create their own vision of that leadership model they're trying to pursue. And they have to really crystallize their sense of purpose as a leader, because that is your foundation. When the going gets tough and you start getting pushback and you start having difficulty executing on whatever your mission is, you have to fall back on that foundation. And if you don't
Mhm.
have that, if you've not done the work to define that leadership vision of who you are and what you're about, you're going to flounder. You're going to be left only able to react to things, and you're not really going to respond to things.
Yeah, that is that's really interesting. One of the things that you just brought up for me as you were sharing that is again this conversation of nature versus nurture and being a leader and one of the things I just heard in what you were sharing is that you have to bring yourself back and almost bring that out of people, the mind's attention and heart's affection. And I was just thinking, in your military background, how do you get someone to care about jumping on a hand grenade? Like, it's almost like, oh man, this is almost the essence. You can't, as a leader, you can't always throw money at a problem. You literally have to be able to inspire people to make the decisions that they make, to for the benefit of the organization.
Well, you're right, and the focus, at least through all of my military experience and the training we went through, was the notion of teamwork versus the individual.
Hmm.
You had to train for and learn how to protect the person in the foxhole next to you. You know, that's what the training was all about. It wasn't about your own survival. It was about the people on each side. And you know, there's an interesting example I can give without getting into too much of the details. In basic Army rifle squad training, when you have two teams and one team is laying down fire while the other team is trying to advance toward the objective. But while you're laying down that fire, you are not shooting in front of you, which you think would be the thing you do because you're effectively protecting yourself. You're shooting at crossways. You've got a field of fire. You either shoot over here or shoot over there, and you alternate. But with the other guys in the squad doing the same thing, you're laying down this blanket of fire to the enemy, and that is a more effective way to do it. But as
Wow.
soon as you
Yeah.
start shooting straight ahead, you've got a very narrow field of fire, and you're not getting anything, and everybody else is exposed.
Right. I actually had a guest on the show. His name was Alan Baker. He's in martial arts, but he also teaches a lot with regards to firearms training and that. And I remember something that where he had kind of shared about part of your job in some of those scenarios, and you can perhaps speak more to this. Was he said the benefit of protecting the other person and doing that same thing, laying down some cover fire, is that two are always better than one.
Mhm.
And so, yes, you could just care about yourself, but then, you're the other person might go down and now you're by yourself. And
Pretty
so
soon you're
there's
gonna
this
be all
huge
alone.
advantage.
Yeah,
That's
that's
right.
right, that's
The
right.
the huge importance of teamwork.
Mhm.
And I'm sure that this is you started with this. You've got managers who are there and the employees are they're quitting bad bosses. They're not leaving the organization. They're quitting the bad bosses.
Right.
Okay. Okay, so right now people are listening and they're thinking, all right, Doug, you got me. I need to improve. I can see some of these things. I've done my self-assessment. I can see some of these areas that I'm weak in. But do you have any idea how much work I have on my plate? How do I know I need to be a better boss, but if you had these people that I work with, and my bosses keep putting more and more work, how can you come in and talk to my bosses, because there's no way for me to do this. Like what you're saying just sounds nice, but I don't know how to make time for that.
Yeah. Well, I think, and by the way, everything you just said, I hear it all the time, in all varying degrees. And there's one more I'll add to your list there. It always, and you probably heard this in church too. You know, the pastor's laying down a real powerful sermon, but you're sitting there thinking, well, that's not me. That's the guy over here. That's the guy next to me. You know?
Yeah,
Thing is
yeah.
true here, you know, it's like, no, no, not me, it's you. And that's part of that awareness, that step one awareness of just saying, forget all that. Okay, I know that I could probably do more for what I need to be about and how I'm going to do this. And if I can start making some change in the way I'm contributing to the effectiveness of this organization, maybe some way, somehow my boss is going to get wind of it and figure it out and want to ask questions too. And I know that may sound very ethereal and pie in the sky kind of thinking, but I've watched it happen. I've watched
Mm,
it work. And again, you got to keep in mind, especially in these larger organizations, there's a power of legacy. However, they came up in the organization, they're going to model that same kind of behavior.
mhm,
And I'm thinking right now, and I don't want to name names, but one executive I worked with who had very big responsibility for some heavy industrial style environments. He had 6 different sites that, if something went wrong on the site, people literally could die. There could be an accident. It's
mhm,
industrial manufacturing kind of thing. And if there was an incident, that site manager would have to call him and report it. And I asked him one day, I said, how does that phone call go? And he kind of hemmed and hawed. And I said, no, how do you typically respond when you get one of those calls? What do you say to the person? And he still kind of kept dodging the question. I said, look, stop. I know a little bit about heavy industrial and construction and things like that. I have a chapter of that in my own life too. I said, it's rough out there. People speak in four-letter words, and I mean, it's blunt, it's crude, I said, how do you talk to your guy? And he finally got sheepish and he grinned and he said, no, I chew his butt off pretty good. And I said, and how does that work for you? What really does that accomplish? And he thought a minute and he said, well, probably not much. And I said, more importantly, when you were that guy and calling the boss like you are now, I said, and the boss chewed you out, I said, what did that do for the situation? Was there any learning? Was there any development? He goes, no. And I said, then why are you doing it now? And he said, he thought a minute and he goes, I guess it's just tradition. And I said, yeah. And again, to what end? What good and what greater good does this serve? And he thought a minute and he said, damn, he said, you're right. I don't have to do that. And then 3 months later, I got a call from the HR director and said, "What have you done to my guy?" And I said, "What do you mean? Am I in trouble?" And she said, "No." She said, "The 6 site managers can't believe the turnaround and the change in things." And she said, "Those 6 site managers are more motivated and more inspired than any of those guys have ever been. And we are so excited that we've got this going on now because that's exactly what we want this organization to be about."
Yeah. Hey, can you come in and speak to the rest of these managers over here? Because whatever you did there
Right,
clearly was work. That's fantastic. And I think that is so true that oftentimes we can learn a certain way of leadership. I don't know if do you have kids yourself,
oh,
Doug?
yeah,
Yeah. So I've got kids, and I remember I thought I knew everything when I started. And as you start to go along, you start realizing how little you really know. And I've got 4 kids, so that it got worse and worse, and realizing, oh man, I really don't know a lot. And so because I got that feedback, and they weren't allowed to just quit and leave because they're my kids. But I think oftentimes for a lot of managers, they've just learned one way, and there is so much insecurity or pain in pivoting and try. Well, if I do this, then they're going to, they won't respect me if I do that, and
right,
you
right.
hear these kind of sentiment, and so it's important, I think, for people to be able to hear what you're sharing right now. No, you can, one, I think, be able to look in the mirror yourself and go, this is the kind of boss that I want to be. I may
Right,
have learned it this way. This is who I want to be as a leader. And which automatically makes your world a better place. Yeah, because you're in it, and then you're also able to see the difference and the impact that it makes on the people around you. At
right.
the end of the day, is there really another way to measure, your satisfaction, or you as a leader, other than to be able to look and ask that question, am I being who I want to be?
Well, I think there's no greater reward, and it does sometimes take some time, but no greater reward than to have somebody weeks, months, or years down the road show up very unannounced and very surprised and say, "Hey, I just want to say thank you for what you showed me and taught me back then. I'm to this day, I'm still doing that, and it works, and it's made my situation so much better. And thank you for
Wow.
giving me that."
Yeah.
I think that's, the ultimate vote of confidence and vote of
Right.
success.
Having, being able to see the impact over a period of time that
Right.
your leadership has made. That's fantastic. I've got to come back to it because normally I would ask at the end, all right, so what's next for you, Doug? But we now already know what's next, and we know you're moving through it. How is people are recognizing right now that they want to engage, they want to really be able to be one of the 10,000? How does someone do that? How do they recognize and maybe work with you, and have you work with them or their organization?
Everything I've put together to offer to the market is on my website, which is simply dougthorpe.com. It talks a little bit about my background, some of the references and testimonials that are there by clients I've worked with in the past. But a couple of fundamental options. I have a lot of content on the website, both with blog posts and my own podcast series. There's a lot of material you can start with there. Just browse it for free. You can join a weekly newsletter newsletter, which the essence of that is I do publish new articles once a week, and that'll come out in a newsletter form, so you can get what's hot off the press. I do, of course, provide one-on-one coaching for people, but I am also building a network of roundtables where it's a peer-to-peer advisory, a mastermind kind of setting. Those roundtables meet monthly, and
Mhm.
what I try to do in organizing those is put people with some similar interest or similar level of responsibility where it is a good bona fide peer-to-peer sharing. We don't try to compete on industries or product function, try to keep it separated enough that way. But that's a way to come together. And I am working on, it's not quite ready yet, but I am putting together a subscription-based service that is a focused training on this whole idea of how to be a better boss with a more programmatic outline of steps and training. I hope to have that online next month, and that'll be available either on a monthly subscription or annual basis.
Okay, so let me just ask this question. If someone sees that they want to, they need to work on themselves as a manager, as a leader in their organization, the number one thing that they need to do is go to dougthorpe.com,
Right.
and they'll find all your
They'll
information
find
there.
all the choices and all the options and all the ideas on what they can do.
But so, guys, you heard that. You were going to keep it simple. Go to dougthorpe.com and check that out. Check out his website. There are lots and lots of options. And there is something to be said about a lifetime's worth of experience, a lifetime's worth of wisdom, and there's no shortcut to real growth, to lasting change. I know that everybody likes to give you the quick 2 minute and just do this and everything will be great, but I think what you're really sharing with us is, we've got to be able to take that look and look within, and then be able to start doing some sort of assessment, some sort of audit, and then from there be able to start addressing it. And anything else that you want to say on this topic, Doug?
Well, I'll just add to what you're saying there. The concept of a phrase I use a lot and I hear a lot is the notion that what got you here won't get you there. So even if you do this work and you become successful at whatever managerial level you're in right now, if that earns you a promotion, you're quickly going to find that odds are exactly the steps and the task you use to earn that promotion are not necessarily the right things to make that promotion work and get you yet again to another level. So it is a constant journey of learning and expansion and
Mm.
lifting the lid, as John Maxwell calls it. You got to lift the lid of leadership capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. Great book, by the way.
Yeah,
So,
I'm a fan.
Doug, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate you
You bet, Neil.
taking the time and just really sharing with us even some of your own struggles. For those of you that are on that board with him, stop being a pain in his behind. Um,
Thanks.
I appreciate you sharing that, because I know there's so many people that are going through these spaces in life, and oftentimes I know that people don't aspire to be leaders because of those examples that they see, and they think, well, if that's what it means, I don't want that. And I think you're really showing that there's so much more opportunity out there and available if that's something. You don't have to be what you've always seen, and you can be a leader in your own life.
That's right. Very good.
Doug, thank you so much.
All right, Neil. Thank you.
All right, take care,
You
guys.
bet.
Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you guys next time on Leadership to Wealth podcast.